My name is Norbert Götz. I'm a professor at the Institute of Contemporary History at Storbritannien University, and I'm going to talk about a book that I've edited, this memoir by Lucie Widl, From Kindertransport to Post-War Sweden, My Memories, which came out with Storbritannien University 2025. My motivation to produce this book emerged very spontaneously during a ceremony for the recently deceased Lucie Widl. Friends and family read large parts of this manuscript, interrupted by music, and I found the story really touching and also with humor and very precise observations. So I thought it would be good to make it available to a larger public. And it's a very personal story, but it touches really key aspects of 20th century history. Like being object to Nazi terror, then the Kindertransport story, like coming to the UK as a minor refugee, meeting better known and half known public figures, eventually migrating to Sweden, getting married and a family, getting in touch with the institutions of the welfare state, and so I think it's this life in a nutshell, like represents 20th century history in the margins of the Holocaust and surrounding the Holocaust. Lucie Widl was born in Vienna in 1930 to a Jewish father and mother with a Catholic background, but who had left the Catholic Church. And she grew up in Vienna and was, after the Nazi terror reached Austria in 1938, sent on a Kindertransport as an unaccompanied minor refugee with her sister to Scotland. Survived the war in the UK and only came back to Vienna in 1949, saw her parents again. Eventually met a Swedish student, went on what must have been one of the first interrail trips with him to the Iberian Peninsula in Morocco, and then settled in Sweden, married someone else and got a family. I've been asked what general light this personal story sheds on history, and I would like to turn this rather around. The story of Lucie Widl is very much in line with the comprehensive literature on Kindertransport, how things are described there. It's really exemplary and serves as a very good entry point to that literature. So let me just give you one example that I found quite unexpected. The literature states that children staying with families in the UK, they were often very unhappy and isolated, whereas children staying in children's home, like in institutions, often these were Zionist institutions, they were much happier during their Kindertransport time. So the memoir really confirms this because Lucie and her sister, they first came into a family and they were very unhappy there and asked to be sent somewhere else, and then came to the camp, and it wasn't a great time for them, but it was better. So this is something that the narrative confirms, but then it adds some nuances. For example, the literature describes like the family experiences and the camp experiences as really two separate things that concern separate groups. But Lucie and her sister, they went from one scheme to the other. So that's something special. And second point would be that although in general the literature describes like the family experience as problematic, they also praise like wealthy Jewish families for being very generous hosts to Kindertransport children. Here, Lucie's story is different because she and her sister came to an extremely wealthy family, but they described their time as the unhappiest in their life, really being treated as a second class. So I think the narrative of hers gives a little warning that we shouldn't be too quick with praising rich donors. The Kindertransport scheme was developed after the November pogroms, which affected Jews in Germany and Austria very, very badly. From then on, it became clear that Jews were persecuted in the German Reich. So between December 1938 and the beginning of World War II, about 10,000 children from Germany and German-occupied annexed Austria were sent to the UK, and also a couple of hundreds to other countries. For example, 500 children came to Sweden. In a way, the Kindertransport scheme was a typical humanitarian program, like focusing on children, but leaving their parents aside. They were separated from their parents and often never saw them again, because the parents were then sent by the Nazis in another direction to the concentration camps. For example, in Lucie's memoir, she describes of the 80 children in her camp, only one other boy, except her and her sister, found his parents again. And so the Turner University's Institute of Contemporary History conducts witness seminars, both for the purpose of illustrating like historical events, but also to reconstruct events. And that leads us to another way of using testimonies in historical research, namely histories from above, the histories and memoirs of decision makers, which can help put greater clarity into how history has actually been formed. In summary, memoirs and testimonies in history can both serve the purpose of illustration, but also then in reconstructing and thereby helping us to understand and to connect to history. Of course, it's very hard to express oneself about the identity of someone else, but we can reconstruct some basic facts, and that is that she was born to a mixed marriage, and with a Jewish father and mother who had left the Catholic Church. So according to a Jewish matrilineal principle, she was not Jewish, because in the Jewish religion, like the religion is transferred from the mother to the child. On the other hand, she was registered upon her birth with the Jewish community of Vienna and received there a Hebrew second name, which was Ruth. and she was very much treated as Jewish throughout at least the first part of her life. It's even like Catholics' relatives said that she shouldn't get some of the inherited family jewelry because she wouldn't survive the war anyhow. So it's a clear indication how it was seen in Austria and in Britain, in the camps. She was taking part in Zionist education and clearly treated as a Jew. Actually, according to the Nuremberg racial laws in Nazi Germany, she was half Jewish, considered as half Jewish, but the children refugee movement in the UK, they considered everyone as Jewish who was affected and discriminated by the Nuremberg racial laws. So she was Jewish in that sense. She had a clear Jewish life experience in the first part of her life, and and then it seems that kind of this Jewish identity, which she can be assumed to have had in that time, in later years slowly diminished. Her children actually only found out in their late teenage years that their mother had this Kindertransport experience and was had a Jewish background, and that they themselves had a Jewish background. So that was not like on the surface in her communication as a mother. Yes, and I think that's a very common observation actually with these Holocaust survivors and survivors of racial persecution during the Nazi period, that they pushed these memories away. So this written manuscript only surfaced after her death. Although, in the family they had asked her to write something about that experience then, but that came at a very late point in her life. At the end of the war, I was put on the working list as a nurse. For some odd reason, I was kept on this job for many months, looking after 80 people with cuts and bruises, sore throats, etc. In serious cases, I called the village doctor, a kind old man who taught me a lot. Without any warning, 10 Auschwitz survivors were sent to us during this period of chaos in Europe. Some brainy person obviously thought we would be a good rehabilitation center for these children. Needless to say, they hated us on sight. After all they had been through, they were certainly not willing to do any work whatsoever. What they needed was a psychologist with whom they could talk to about some of their traumatic experiences. As they were in very poor health, I came often in contact with them in my capacity as a nurse. I even managed to gain some of their trust and confidence. For example, we could not explain the disappearance of bread from the breakfast table each morning. In the end, I found the bread hidden under their mattresses. As there were lots of mice in the castle, this was a problem. It took a long time for them to understand that there would always be bread for breakfast the next day and the next.